Hey everyone, today we're going to learn how to migrate from a static Markdown delivery system for our Astro powered blog to one that uses Couchbase for content storage and delivery. A complete step-by-step tutorial is available on my own blog at bengreenberg.dev, along with full code snippets and a link to a GitHub repo with the complete working code. First of all, before we get started, let's make sure we understand our terms. What's Astro and what's Couchbase? Astro is a modern web framework designed for building fast, optimized websites with a focus on developer experience. It allows developers to use their preferred JavaScript frameworks and languages, and features a unique island architecture that only hydrates interactive components on the client side as needed. This approach reduces JavaScript load, leading to a better performance. You can learn a lot more about Astro and how to get started using it by exploring its official documentation at docs.astro.build. On the other hand, Couchbase is a NoSQL database that combines the capabilities of a document store and a key value store with a flexible JSON data model. It supports high performance, scalability, and reliability, making it ideal for web, mobile, and IoT applications. Couchbase offers advanced features like full text search, analytics, and eventing, and is designed for distributed multi-cloud and on-premises deployments. It provides a rich query language, built-in caching, and seamless synchronization across devices. You can learn a lot more about Couchbase and all of its features by visiting its official docs at docs.couchbase.com. Okay, now that we got that out of the way, and we're all on the same page on terms, let's get started. Oh, wait, there may be one last question we need to resolve first. Why would I want to use a NoSQL database like Couchbase for my blog in the first place? Why are we even doing that? Well, that's a great question, Ben. I'm not running a high traffic site, at least most of the time, and I'm not generating content at a very large scale. So for me, the benefit of migrating to a NoSQL database for my Astro blog is that it allows me to have a more flexible content management system. For example, I can add new fields to my posts without having to update the schema each time. I can also introduce other forms of content like videos that may not fit neatly into the traditional database model. Okay, now that we covered that last burning question, let's get going. So if you're like me, you probably started your Astro blog as a content delivery mechanism that used static markdown pages within the same repository as the source code of your blog. And that's not unusual, that's perfectly normal, and pretty much the standard way to get going, which is exactly what I did when I started out, which is I used the Astro build, the default Astro build, along with using the Tailwind Astro Starter blog template for the general design of the blog. And then I just created markdown files in a folder called source/content/blog and kept all my markdown blog posts there and delivered them directly from there. In order to convert that to be using a Couchbase database and to change the markdown blog posts into Couchbase documents that use JSON, I need to first take all my existing blog posts and convert them into the format for Couchbase and send them to Couchbase. So in order to do that, I just created a quick script called Markdown to Couchbase, and we only need to use this script one time because we're going to use it just one time to convert all the existing blog content into the format for Couchbase and then send it to Couchbase. And let's just quickly run through that script. So the first thing we do is establish a connection to our Couchbase database, and we use our environment variables that we have defined. And let's take a quick look at those environment variables. We need to define the connection string to our Couchbase database, our username and our password for our Couchbase database, and all those things can be found and created in our Couchbase database platform. And just to make sure we're on the same page, we are using Couchbase Capella, which is Couchbase's database as a service product, which is entirely hosted on the cloud, and you can choose which cloud provider you use, AWS, GCP, doesn't really matter. And the data platform for Couchbase Capella, the actual website, has all this information, pretty quick and straightforward way to find it, with a couple clicks throughout the platform to find your connection string and also create your database authentication credentials. So once we have those things, we establish the connection, and then we start using that connection. So first of all, we grab all of our markdown files from the source of our blog post, source/content/blog. We read those markdown files, and then we parse those markdown files into JSON format, and then we send those markdown files to Couchbase. You'll notice that we use the upsert method from the Couchbase SDK for Node.js. The upsert method is a slightly different method than the insert method, and it's an important distinction because the upsert method will first check to see if that document already exists in the database. If it does, it will update the document if there is a need to update it. If not, it'll just skip to the next document. And that's important because let's say we're running this a couple times, we made a couple mistakes in the beginning, and we don't want to keep on replicating existing documents that did get added successfully. So we use the upsert document to make sure we're not duplicating documents inside our Couchbase database. And then lastly, of course, we create a function that executes all these various functions, the reading the markdown files, the parsing the markdown files, and then the sending them, storing them into Couchbase. And then we execute that function. So we would run this one time in our terminal, node migrate markdown to Couchbase, and then that would be done. And I've kept this in the repository for a future use for anyone who would like, in the scripts folder called just root level in the scripts folder. So that's how we export all of our existing data and import it into Couchbase. How do we now at this point fetch all the existing data from Couchbase in a way going forward in order to render it onto our blog? So we do that. It's actually pretty straightforward. It may not seem like that, but what we basically need to do is we need to change the rendering of our blog, the fetching of the data from our blog from Astro content, Astro content, which is probably what you see scattered throughout all your Astro blog files. And we need to, all your Astro, layout files, etc., things like that. We need to change that to instead grab the data from Couchbase. So we're going to create a file in source DB, and we're going to call it couchbase.ts, and this file is going to define all the functions we need to grab the different parts of the data of our blog. We want to grab, of course, all of the blog posts. We need a function for that. We want to grab a specific blog post by ID. We want to grab authors and a specific author. We want to grab tags and a specific tag. And then we also include a couple helper functions to normalize some of that data for us. So of course, just like in the migration script, we first create a function that initializes the connection to our Couchbase database. We call that init. And then we have a helper function here that just basically takes the date string from the Couchbase document and converts it to a JavaScript date object, and then returns the post with a JavaScript date object. And now we get into the meat of the matter, which is the functions to grab the different elements that we already just mentioned. So we have a function to grab blog posts, all the blog posts. And what's really cool, and I want to shout this out, is this kind of looks like SQL, right? But this is a NoSQL database. One of the cool things about Couchbase is it employs a SQL-like language. So if you're coming from a SQL database, the cognitive load of transitioning over just got a little less, because you can use things like select statements, from statements, where statements, etc., just like you would in a SQL database to get your data. So we create a query to grab all of our blog posts. And how do we know they're blog posts? Where the type equals blog posts, right? We add that to each blog post document we add to our database, and we grab them all, and then we map over them. We use that convert to date function to map over them and change the date string to a date object in JavaScript, and we return the post in the format we want with an ID, title, date, summary, tags, and of course the actual post. Same thing for getting a specific blog post. The only difference is now we're getting it by blog post ID, and return just that one ID. And then now, before we get to returning our tags, let's do some normalizing of our tag data. And this, of course, will be very different depending on the unique constraints of your own personal blog. For my blog, I want to normalize some of the tags, spelling and capitalization. So for example, AI should be all capitalized, GitHub should be, the G should be capitalized, the H should be capitalized, etc., etc. And then we return the formatted tags. And so we're going to use that helper method in our get tags, which is very similar to our get blog posts, except the query, instead of asking for the type where is blog post, the type is tag. And then similarly, just like get blog post by ID, we're going to get a blog post by slug, passing in the specific slug of the tag, get tagged by slug, passing in the specific tag slug that we want to fetch, and returns just that tag. And then we have a couple other methods to get all authors and to get author, a specific author by ID. So now that we have all those, we export them all and make them available to the rest of our Astro site, and we can use them. We're going to use them inside a functions file that's going to create 2 helper functions that we are going to use throughout our actual Astro site that incorporates the get blog posts function we created in the Couchbase file. This, of course, is called fetch and sort blog posts, and it does exactly what it says. It fetches the blog posts using the get blog post function and then sorts them in date order and then returns them. And then we have a function called exclude drafts, which basically just takes that data and excludes any post that is currently in draft state, because clearly you don't want to return a post that's not yet fully ready onto your blog. So now that we have this, we're ready to actually start using these things. I'm only going to show you really just 1 or 2 places where we use them, because the way we use them is pretty much the same in every part of our Astro layout and Astro components. And what we're basically doing, as I highlighted just a second ago, is we're taking out the Astro content as the place we're fetching our data from, and instead fetching the data from Couchbase database. So for example, let's take a look at a pretty big layout file, an Astro layout called list with tags layout. This is one of our primary layout files in my blog, and this one basically renders a view of all the tags with a count of the number of posts in each tag and blog post paginated with the date, the publish date, and a summary of the blog post and a link to the blog post. Pretty primary, essential view for a blog. So essentially what we're doing is, instead of Astro content as our delivery source, we instead fetch and sort the blog posts, and we use the exclude drafts, make sure we're not including any drafts, and then we get the tags using these helper functions that we just described a moment ago. And then we invoke those functions, we assign their data to different variables, tags, posts, and filtered posts, excluding the drafts, and then we create a couple helper functions for the layout. For example, we want to count the amount of posts in each tag, so we create a function called tag count, and then we use these things in our layout. And this is a pretty long layout using a lot of Tailwind, and Tailwind is what it is. You either love it or you hate it, or you love and hate it, but that's not for here or for now. Instead, let's just take a quick peek at how we use these variables with the data inside. So for example, when we're using the tags, which contains all of the tags data, we map through that data, and for each tag, we create an HTML element that includes the link to the tag page and the name of the tag and how many posts are inside that tag. Similarly, when we're going through the data of all of the blog posts, we map through that data, and we create an HTML element for each blog post with the publish date, the name of the blog post, the title of the blog post, and a quick summary, and the tags associated with that blog post. And that, my friends, is basically it. That's how you use Couchbase inside an Astro site to render the data, to fetch the data from Couchbase, and to render the data on your Astro blog. Now, the next step we're going to talk about is how we take data of new blog posts and add it to our Couchbase database. In order to add new Markdown blog posts into your Couchbase database, we are going to separate out the concerns of taking our blog post data out of the source code of our actual blog and putting it into its own repository called blog posts. Before we begin, let's actually talk about for a second why we still want to write our blog posts in Markdown. We could do our blog posts in other formats and not Markdown, but I think it's important, at least for me, to keep the blog data in Markdown initially for editing and collaboration and for all the drafts, because Markdown, of course, is one of the most universally recognized formats for content, and which authors, technical writers, other developers, people can look at it, can contribute to it, can help edit it, and understand what they're looking at. And I therefore want to keep my blog post drafts and probably my current blog posts in general in Markdown format for future editing, which is why I'm going to separate out the concern of the blog post data, put it into its own repository, and then create a process, a workflow, by which the Markdown posts get added into my Couchbase database. Now, in order to do that, you see I have a new repository here called blog posts, and it has 3 folders I want to point out. One is .github, one is drafts, and the other one is published. .github is going to host both the script for importing new drafts when they're ready to be published to Couchbase, and also the GitHub action workflow that is going to invoke that script. Drafts is where I'm going to host posts that are not yet ready to be published, and publish is where the posts are going to go when they have been added to my Couchbase database. Now, that's a lot of steps that if I was doing that manually would be probably a bit annoying. So we automate that. Let's talk about how we automate that. Let's first take a look at the GitHub files. First, we're going to look at the workflow. So a workflow is a YAML file that specifies the actions for a GitHub action to do when it's invoked and when to invoke that action. You can read all about GitHub Actions on GitHub's documentation. There is so much you could do with GitHub Actions. If you haven't yet been exposed to them or are familiar with them, I highly recommend them. The sky's the limit for the things you can do with GitHub Actions. So in this case, we're going to import blog posts to Couchbase when a pull request has been closed, which is to say it's been merged. And how do we make sure that we're only acting on merge pull requests is we create an if conditional statement, and we get the data from the event data from GitHub, and we check that it's merged is true and not the pull request was just closed and not merged. And we also want to make sure that the merge pull request has a label called publish. So from my workflow perspective, what that means is I will open a pull request with a draft blog post. I will edit the blog post, collaborate on the blog post, and when I'm ready to publish it, I will add the publish label on the pull request and then merge the pull request, which will start this action. And what's the action? First, we check out the repository, and then we set up a Node.js environment in our GitHub action environment. We install the dependencies we need, which is gray matter, which reads and parses front matter from a Markdown, Couchbase, which is the Couchbase SDK for Node.js, and .env to read the environment variables inside the script. We then run the script, which we're going to look at in just a moment, and we run it in the GitHub Action Runner environment, in the container, the GitHub Action container that we've created automatically by running this workflow, and we pass in the various environment variables that we need for the successful execution of that script. We need, just like we needed in our Astro personal site, our Astro blog to begin with, we need the same things. We need a Couchbase URL, the connection string, and we need our database authentication credentials, our username and password, and we also need the bucket by which we're putting the data for the blogs, the blog posts, and we call that bucket, I call that bucket blog bucket. You can call it whatever you like, but we store that again in a GitHub Action secrets, and also we need our GitHub token, which allows the GitHub action to perform actions on our repository, like writing to our repository and things like that. All these environment variables are stored in the settings of our repository, and you go into settings. I'll show you in a moment. Let's take a look. You go to settings, and then you go down to secrets, and you look at the secrets here, and you'll see that we have repository secrets here, and they're stored here. You create a new repository secret just like this, naming it and putting in the secret where you would like to put it. And that's how you add secrets to your blog post. So once you've done that, Once you've added the secrets and you've created this workflow, that workflow will run every single time you have merged a pull request with the publish label, but it won't do anything until you actually create the script that it needs. And we put that script inside action/import post/source. This script is going to be essentially exactly the same as the script we used when we initially began this process by exporting our existing Markdown blog post data, converting it into JSON, and putting it in and porting it into our Couchbase database. Really, the only difference is going to be pretty minor. First, we define the directories by which we're working in. Our drafts directory, of course, is drafts, and our publish directory is published. So that's one difference that's distinct from the original import post script that we used initially when we began this process. But the rest of it is going to be pretty much the same. We grab our Markdown files from the drafts folder, right? And that's what this function does, get Markdown files. We read those Markdown files. We parse those Markdown files. This should feel all very familiar from what we did before. And then we store those Markdown files in our Couchbase database, again, using the upsert method, just like we did before. And then the thing that will be, again, the thing that will now be different and distinct is we now want to do one other thing that we didn't do previously, we didn't need to do, is that now we want to also move the draft Markdown blog post from the drafts folder into the published folder. So we create another function called move file to published, and we essentially take the old path and the new path, and we move it from the old path into the new path by using the file services, the async promises rename method to take the old path and new path, and we move it from drafts into published. And then we print out some console logs that we want to make sure this actually worked well. So we just want to make sure we're moving it from the right old path to the right new path, and we console out when it's done. And if there's any errors, we console the error out, and then we log out the contents of the directories just to make sure everything worked out okay. We create the main function that's going to contain all of these various functions inside of it, and then we invoke that function when we execute this script in the GitHub action runner. That's essentially it. So the way that looks is, let's just take a quick example here. If we look at our actions log and take a look at one actions run, we'll see, and we go into there, the whole actions run, by the way, took 24 seconds, pretty quickly. We'll see the various steps. We see that we set up the job, right? Means we set up with the right GitHub token, we provisioned the right GitHub action container, we checked out the repository using the actions checkout, we checked out the blog post repository, getting the current data of the main branch, we set up our Node.js environment, we installed our dependencies, and we imported the blog posts. And we see we ran the GitHub import post source import post.js file. We ran it with the right environment variables, as we see there: Couchbase URL, Couchbase username, Couchbase password, the bucket, and the token. And then we inserted or updated the one blog post that we changed, which was this blog post that I'm talking about right now in this video. And then we see that the initial drafts folder state had two files in it, a git keep file just to keep the folder alive, and the actual blog post that we're discussing. The publish folder had only the git keep file in it to keep it alive and nothing else. And then we log out that we're now moving the file from drafts to published. It says now that the file has been moved to the published directory, and now the state of those two folders is the drafts only has the git keep file, and published now has git keep and the file because it's been published. And we log out the migration has completed. We commit and push these changes to our main branch. We close out the GitHub action container we created, and we complete the job. And that's it. And that's how you would take new Markdown blog posts into your Astro blog by writing them in Markdown, keeping them in Markdown for collaboration and consistency and the universality sort of Markdown content, and then creating this automated actions workflow that does the whole job for you of taking that Markdown, converting it to JSON, and adding it to your Couchbase database every time you're ready to publish a draft blog post. In this video, you have gone on a whirlwind journey of transforming a static markdown delivery Astro block to one that uses the flexibility and speed of a NoSQL database like Couchbase. There was a lot that we covered in this video. If you felt lost, don't worry, because each step of this process is covered in my written tutorial that can be found on my blog at bengreenberg.dev. Again, thanks for joining me on this journey.